Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar with Geoff Simmons, the leader of the Opportunities Party. The Waikato Chamber of Commerce is the voice of business in the Waikato, and as part of that, we've asked all political party leaders to address our members, specifically to speak about what they and their party intends to do for the Waikato business community. So if you have any questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll find it down the bottom there. And we will ask those questions after Geoff's presentation. So Geoff, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I'll hand over to you now to present to our members. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Kia ora koutou. I will just start off with a little bit about myself and about the Opportunities Party, or TOP, and then just do a brief presentation outlining our key focuses for the 2020 election. And then we should have plenty of time for your questions. So briefly about me, I'm an economist by training. I've spent my career researching solutions to New Zealand's biggest problems, only to watch career politicians throw those solutions in the too hard basket. So I figured if you can't beat them, join them. After all, the only way to become less popular than an economist is by being a politician, pretty much. I grew up in Okaiho, but I have a strong link to the Waikato. My grandparents lived on a farm near Te Kuiti, so we would make that journey every holidays, and I'd spend every holidays in the area around Te Kuiti. So Hamilton was the big smoke for me as a kid. And eventually, after I did university, I moved to Wellington to start work at Treasury. I've worked in Treasury, I've run my own business, I've worked overseas as well, and now ended up as leader of the Opportunities Party. For those of you who don't know much about TOP, we started back in 2016 with former leader Gareth Morgan, kicked us off, and we went through to get 2.5% in the 2017 election, and Gareth then handed the party over to members in 2018, and I was elected leader then. And, we are prepared to work with Labour or National. That's something that a lot of people want to know. We see ourselves as being centrist in terms of our values. We're all about equality of opportunity, people getting a fair go, and that's the sort of stuff that both Labour and National talk about very much as well. Although, Labour tends to focus on your equality of opportunity is determined by the environment you grow up in, and National more says that your opportunity is determined by how hard you work. And both of those things are true. We think that's why we see ourselves as centrist. What differentiates us really is that New Zealand currently doesn't have equality of opportunity. We have some of the most expensive housing in the world, some of the poorest social statistics. It's easier to make money in New Zealand by speculating on housing than it is by starting a business. And we think those sorts of issues are a real barrier to equality of opportunity. And that's why we believe that real change will be needed in order to shift us to actually being a country where people get a fair go, where they really do have equality of opportunity, much like we like to see ourselves as. After all, we're the country where a beekeeper went on to be the first to climb the world's highest mountain. That's one of the many stories we tell ourselves, but the statistics suggest that country no longer exists in terms of everyone getting a decent start in life and having the opportunities to fulfill their potential, which after all is what we're all about. So I will very briefly just do the technical thing of sharing my screen to take you through a quick presentation about our key policies for 2020. Is this going? Yes. And really the slogan says it all, don't leave change to chance. We believe that a vote for any of the parties in Parliament basically is leaving real change to chance. And we think that TOP has the skills and the vision to create real change so that really everyone does have that equality of opportunity that we are talking about. And you'll see why as I go through the presentation. So our 4 focuses for the 2020 election, and I will talk briefly to these very much from a business lens. First up, affordable housing and rent. New Zealand's housing market is a hot, sticky mess. I think you'll all agree that that is the case. From a business angle, you might be wondering, well, why do I care about that? But this really affects your ability to attract employees because a lot of people can't afford to live near where they work. Rents and house prices have grown faster than incomes for the last 30 years. That's been under National and Labour. It shows no signs of letting up. And the upshot of this is that we have some of the highest house prices in the world. Again, that affects our affects our ability to attract workers. It affects people's ability to spend into the economy because they're spending so much of their income, more income than anywhere else in the world, on housing. As with COVID, we need to flatten the curve, as it were, and our vision is that we need to keep house prices and rents stable for another generation, another 30 years, so that incomes have a chance to rise and catch up. And in case you haven't noticed, other countries have done that. If you look at the bottom of that chart, you can see Germany has achieved it. And in case you didn't notice, Germany has a pretty strong economy. So we think the sort of claims about high house prices being a sign of success isn't fair. We need to stop pretending that buying and selling houses off each other is a way to get rich as a country. That's kind of the myth, the cultural myth that we have created. Now, you will probably all understand the issues with the supply side. We need to free up the ability for people to build housing. That's a big part of this solution. A big part of that, of freeing up the supply side, is allowing local authorities to invest in the infrastructure to actually allow for that housing to be built. That's one issue that no political party in Parliament is prepared to talk about. But there is another side to this, and this really affects business because our tax system hugely favours investment in housing. Like I said, most people understand the supply issues. They don't tend to understand this demand side issue. And this really is driving speculation. You'll see from this graph, we have some of the highest taxes on investments in the Western world. So businesses included in that, KiwiSaver, bank deposits, and we have some of the lowest tax rates on housing in the Western world. That difference between that tax treatment is the incentive to speculate on housing, and that is why we have some of the highest house prices in the world. It's why we have more of our money tied up in housing than any other country in the world, which means we have less of our money free to invest in business than any other country in the OECD. And we wonder why we have to rely on Chinese money to build baby milk, milk powder factories in Pōkeno. It's because of this. It's no secret. All the experts know about it, but of course, no other politicians want to talk about this particular issue. And of course, as you will all know, a capital gains tax excluding the family home would not solve this problem because it would push up tax rates on business as much as it pushed up tax rates on rental property. And all the while, it was going to leave owner-occupied housing, which, as you can see from that graph, is the big loophole. It would leave that untouched. So what do we need to do to this? Well, what do we need to do to fix this? I think you'll see there's 3 possible ways to solve this problem. You either need to increase the tax on property, or you need to reduce the tax on other investments, or you do a bit of both. And actually, if we were to refer to Germany from the previous graph, that's exactly what they do. They have slightly higher taxes on property and lower taxes on businesses. There's all these myths out there about Northern European countries being high tax, but actually when you look at their business tax rates, they aren't that high. So, happy to talk more about these things, but here's our 4-point plan for solving the housing crisis. and I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A. But the main thing for business is that what we want to do is drive investment away from speculation in housing into investing in businesses that actually create exports and jobs. Second major policy plank is the universal basic income. It's a simple idea, but it takes a lot to get your head around because we're used to thinking of the tax system and the welfare system as being different things. Now, as employers, you'll be familiar with this because a lot of people won't work more hours because the tax and because the benefit system and working for family system disincentivizes them to do so. Many people end up paying real tax rates of up to 50 or 100% once you take into account things like working for families and benefits. So they're not prepared to take on extra work when it's offered by employers. This is a major barrier and will become a far more barrier in the future as we move to the gig economy. So automation and artificial intelligence are increasing. We don't think that's a bad thing. That's a fantastic sign of technology being used. Roughly 15% of jobs will be lost over the next decade, though, as a result of this. So people are going to be, we don't think there's going to be mass unemployment in the next couple of decades, but people are going to be increasingly moving in and out of the workforce, needing to retrain, needing to start businesses, and making them crawl through the doors of wins every time they have to do that is dehumanizing, complex, and creates bureaucracy. So the UBI is a simpler version of that. So the idea is that we just basically give the job seekers allowance to everyone, $250 a week. When this has been trialled overseas, no, people don't stop work and they don't, they don't spend all their money on alcohol and ciggies. What most people do actually is they retrain, they start businesses, they spend more time with their kids. All of these things are good things for society. And the reason for that is because of the welfare trap. Like I said, most employers will be familiar with this welfare trap. This is one example of what the job seekers benefit looks like coming off the job seekers benefit. If you're on the minimum wage and you see that after you've worked a few hours, this massive gulf opens up where every hour you work for about the next 20 hours is only worth $3 or $4 per hour. It's just not worth getting out of bed to do. So what we're asking people to do with this current benefit system is swing across that gap, take an almighty risk and try and get into, 30 hours a week sort of employment to be able to justify moving off the benefit so that's actually worthwhile. Just as a fun fact, the Greens guaranteed minimum income will push this welfare trap out to about 36 hours. So we'll be expecting people to go from nothing to full-time work to be able to justify getting back into work. Very briefly, this is what the system looks like with TOP's proposed UBI. So the idea is to just smooth out these welfare traps so that people always have the incentive to work. We know that when that system has been trialled overseas, beneficiaries are more likely to work as a result because they're keeping the money from every hour that they work. And this is, like I said, really important as we move to the gig economy. People are moving in and out of work. Part-time work is going to become the norm, and we need to incentivize that work. So the real winners from the UBI are the working poor, effectively. People on the minimum wage, they will go above the living wage, and that's without employers having to pay for it. And by the way, why do we expect employers to pay the living wage? I mean, yes, people need to be able to live on what they're earning, but why do we expect employers to pay that when the biggest driver of the living wage, cost of living, is housing? Businesses are already punished by our tax system favouring housing over business, and we expect them to pick up the pieces from that, the impacts of that in terms of higher house prices by making them pay people higher wages. We already have one of the highest minimum wages in the Western world. We don't think that needs to rise further. The UBI is what will incentivise and help move the working poor out of poverty, push them above the living wage. Remember, we have 50,000 families in New Zealand that are working but are in poverty. So that's the UBI. Third priority is smart small business. Labor listens to unions, National listens to big business. The 500,000 small businesses that we have in New Zealand, the generators of employment and tax revenue for the country, are politically homeless from our perspective, and we want TOP to be the home for those small businesses, because that's the real backbone of our economy. And our proposal for small business, firstly, is to abolish provisional tax for small businesses. You guys will all know, no doubt, the complication that adds to the system, and it's completely unnecessary. We don't, government can borrow very cheaply. This is about, this just gets money coming in the door slightly quicker than it otherwise would, and adds a whole lot of complexity and penalties to the system. We want to abolish provisional tax, and that's part of a much wider plan that we have to simplify the interaction between small business and government. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We want to remove fringe benefit tax for low emissions vehicles. You can already get fringe benefit tax off your double cab ute. Why not low emissions vehicles when we're supposed to be moving to a low carbon economy? We want to see grants for uptake of digital technology and for investment in energy and resource efficiency. So again, getting more businesses online simplifies their administration using things like Xero, those sorts of things, and we can actually put in a whole bunch of government support into that package behind them. Energy and resource efficiency, these are good for the environment and for businesses' bottom line. Helping them conserve energy, of course, reduces power bills, fuel bills, all that sort of stuff, and at the same time reduces carbon emissions. Europe's been doing this sort of stuff for 20 years. It's very cost effective. We should be doing it in New Zealand. We want to rein in big business, so making sure they pay small businesses on time, very important to us. And also we have some of the weakest competition laws in the Western world, and that causes a lot of problems in terms of big businesses using their market power on small business. We all know about the banks, right? And that would certainly help rein in the banks. We also favour a royal commission on banks in that respect, as to why we're the most profitable banking market in the Western world. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we want to encourage productive investment, shifting investment away from housing towards businesses that actually create jobs and exports, all that sort of stuff. So that's our smart small business plan. And lastly, a climate-friendly recovery. So the government is making massive investments over the next few years in response to COVID. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to invest in infrastructure. And at the moment, that money is being blown on pet projects all the way, on both sides of the house. National has its pet projects, Labor has its pet projects. The New Zealand First are desperately trying to buy votes in Northland. The Greens have promised solar panels on top of every house. I don't know if you've noticed, folks, but our peak electricity demand is 6 p.m. in the middle of winter, and solar panels are not a lot of use at that point in time. So there's a whole lot of really poor investment promises being made during this election. And TOP's point is that we should be investing in the stuff that actually has a good business case. We need to bring back real business cases to government infrastructure. What's going to improve productivity for the economy, make us working smarter, not harder? And secondly, what sort of infrastructure is going to allow us to meet our emissions reductions goals? So that climate-friendly recovery is a massive part of this, of the issues that we're facing in this election. A part of that should be to be focusing on planting erosion-prone land in natives. We shouldn't be blanketing the countryside in pine trees. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment says that we shouldn't be using pine trees to offset fossil fuel emissions through the emissions trading scheme. And that's the government's chief environmental advisor. And what did the government do? Well, they ignored him because, of course, planting pine trees is the only thing that the three coalition partners at the moment can actually agree on. It's a terrible idea. Forestry, where it is, you know, the best use of land is absolutely great, but we shouldn't be incentivizing it for carbon capture, with the exception of planting natives on erosion-prone land. I talked about making businesses and more energy efficient, but we need to do the same in our households. Massive opportunity for investment there to make our homes warmer and drier and more energy efficient. And in terms of what sort of 21st century infrastructure we should be building, again, Top thinks that a lot of this should come down to business cases, but the sort of stuff we should be looking at is much broader than road and rail. We need to be looking at the importance of broadband and cellular infrastructure. These are massive, as we've seen as a result of COVID, allowing people to be online and connected. This webinar is a great example of that, and thanks to Waikato Chamber of Commerce for your willingness to set this up and do this remotely. It's fantastic innovation. And the other big opportunity that we see in terms of 21st century infrastructure is investing in local authorities. Local authorities have 40% of the infrastructure in this country, but only 7% of the revenue to actually look after that infrastructure. That's why we've got pipes bursting all over the country. Central government needs to stop dangling coins in front of local authorities and fund them properly so that they can invest in good infrastructure so that we can have more affordable, high quality housing in our city centres. We need to be building up. That is the key thing that we need to do to stop all of our productive land being overcome with urban sprawl, and make sure that people can live in an affordable, warm, dry home that's really close transport-wise to where they work, because when you take into account transport costs, that is much more affordable and has a lower environmental impact as well. So massive opportunities we see for infrastructure, but we really have to think about these things a lot differently than we're doing right now. And longer term, we are going to need a higher carbon price in order to pay for all of that, to pay for all of that investment that we need to do. So there's a quick run through through our priorities for the 2020 election. Sarah, if you want to take me off the shared screen now, you can. I can stop. I can actually press that. Oh, great. Thank you. Awesome. So that was a really quick whiz through our priorities. We have a bunch of other policies outside of that we don't have I didn't have the time to go into, but those are the things that we're focusing on for 2020. Happy to talk about any of those in more detail, or if you've got questions outside of that, happy to take those too. Thanks, Don.
Yeah, cheers, Geoff. No, that was a very quick run through, and I think we'd probably appreciate a longer one. There was some very, very interesting ideas in there. I'm sure that some of the other political parties will be looking to nick a few, because they were very well thought through. And in fact,
happy for people to nick those ideas, Don. Then I can go back to another career if they take up enough of them.
Well, that's the first question. That says, "Hi, Geoff." From XKZL. Hi, Geoff. How do you feel the support is from other political parties regarding the implementation of a UBI? And could you, in answering that, then also shift into some of your other policies, because there were some very good ideas in there?
Yeah, I mean, our key politicians know about these big issues, but of course, career politicians, the incentive is to talk about change, but not actually deliver on it, because there's a desire not to ruffle anyone's feathers, and of course change is challenging for people, right? So I think that's why we've seen 30 years of tinkering around the edges from both Labour and National. In respect to their desire to pick up these sorts of policies, I mean, I think the career politicians would love to give some of these ideas a go if they had someone to blame for them, and that's really what the role that Top wants to play, is to be in Parliament as the voice of reason, proposing bold ideas to shift the country, and we're happy to take the heat for that. And I think that will help shift the ground, prepare the ground for the career politicians to come in. We know that both National and Labor have looked at a UBI in the past. Grant Robertson looked at it most recently. Don Brash looked at it back in 2005. So the appetite is definitely out there. It's a as we saw with the tax working group, what's really lacking in politics is someone to actually stand up for these ideas. You know, Labor kind of dangled the capital gains tax and then left Sir Michael Cullen out to dry in terms of having to defend it. You know, if people really believe in these ideas, then they need to stick up for them and actually take the conversation to the public, and that's what we are prepared to do. I mean, our top team is very much a group of experts. I'm an economist. My deputy leader Shai is a lawyer. We've got architects. We've got scientists. We've got small business people. You know, in our team, and so we want to be, you know, at the cabinet table, working with Labor or National to really, you know, push these ideas through.
Okay, well, the UBI is something I did a little bit of research on, and there's another question from Hayden Cargo on minimum wage. UBI was looked at in the States way back, even in Richard Nixon's day, which is going a long way back, and they actually did some experimentation with it, and the results seemed to be mixed. Can you comment on that? You'd probably have a better understanding of the research that was done than I.
Yeah, so the research was I mean, in terms of when you say that they were mixed, they're, you know, the outcomes kind of depend on what you think is a good outcome, I guess. But the most people worked more with the UBI. So most people who were on benefits worked more when it was experimented with. The people who didn't work more tended to be either people who were training or people who were staying home with small kids. And I think we know now that both of those things will improve our productivity long term, and so actually are a bonus. So generally speaking, I think the outcomes are positive.
Okay, well, let's continue on that. Certainly a couple of questions, one from Hayden Cargo. What is TOP's view on a minimum wage going forward?
Yeah, so I think we have seen, I mean, the evidence on a minimum wage is that having it slowly increase over time is good for productivity because it encourages businesses to invest. I think we're at the stage now where, like I said, as a country, we have the second highest minimum wage in the Western world. Certainly, it's very high compared to our average wage. So that makes us relatively unusual in that respect. I would say that continuing to push the minimum wage at the rate that the government is doing now does risk increasing unemployment. I mean, you do want to keep a steady upward pressure on it, but I think there has to be at a moderated pace to make sure that we aren't getting unemployment as a result.
The debate now, which many of the councils are having, and certainly down here they're doing it with Hamilton City Council, on the living wage, which ratchets it up another 15% from the new minimum wage. You see that as being a disincentive to workers?
Well, I think a disincentive to take on workers, if that's what you mean. For businesses to take on workers going to the living wage. I mean, like I said in my presentation, the key driver of the cost of living in New Zealand is housing. And it befuddles me why we expect businesses to pick up that particular cost. So that's why the UBI would lift people who are on the minimum wage above the living wage without businesses having to make that payment.
Final comment on UBI, and then we'll shift on to a couple of other questions. Do you see UBI as even more important, even essential, with the economic fallout of COVID with many more people out of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID's giving us a view of the future, right? We're getting a glimpse of what the economy is going to be looking like, even more so over the next 10 years. I mean, I talk quite a lot to people, experts in America, because I see the American economy as being 5 years ahead of us. I mean, the warehouse shutting down is just the start, folks. In big chunks of America, whole malls are shutting down because once they lose those cornerstone big retail outlets, the whole structure collapses. I mean, in New Zealand, we're still building malls. It's, that's got to be the worst investment out there. Amazon has taken over in the United States, the online sales, and I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg with the warehouse, downsizing here. These sorts of issues are going to it's only going to accelerate in the future, and I think people are going to be moving in and out of work. Jobs are going to need to become more flexible, and personally, I think that is a good thing. We should be embracing technology. We should be aiming to be more productive, and if we can get machines to do more things for us, that's great. We just have to make sure that we look after people in the meantime and make sure that they have the money to keep the economy going. And I think that's what we're seeing in parts of the country with COVID, that a UBI would be really helpful in terms of boosting spending into that local economy.
Excellent. Well, I think we've done the UBI pretty well. There's a couple of other questions I think people would be interested in. One from Vaughan Winiata. Will you support the establishment of a government-ratified small business leadership group tasked with fostering an organised voice to government, representative of the wider small business sector, very much like the Chamber?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there definitely needs to be a stronger voice from small business at the table in Wellington, and for too long that has been, been done on the basis of either through existing organisations or through, hand-appointed, steering groups that the government sets up. I think the government has to help the small business community come together and find its own voice. I think that's really important, and that needs to be there because, as I mentioned before, what we'd like to see is a massive simplification of the interaction between government and small business. I mean, from talking to small business people, one of the things I hear quite a lot is about health and safety. And it's not that we should remove health and safety legislation. Health and safety is important, but it sounds at the moment like a lot of small businesses are going to consultants and paying through the nose to buy forms to fill out their health and safety compliance, if you like, and that could be done a whole lot more simply by having an interface, an electronic interface with government that actually sent things to small businesses when certain issues were triggered, such as if you employ someone, bam, here's a contract you might want to use, here's some health and safety information for you, all that sort of stuff. I think there's huge scope for that sort of things, but it needs to be designed, that system needs to be designed with small business at the table.
Well, the interesting thought that rolls out of that is that how many of our current House of Representatives actually have run a small business, and is it behoving on the likes of someone like Vaughan Winiata or others who are business people actually putting themselves up for election so that when there is something that affects business people, you've got cool heads and reasonable people sitting in Parliament making the decision. So should we be encouraging more and more business people to stand for the various parties and including TOP?
I mean, absolutely. Like I said, I've run a small business in the past. We have Matthew Pottinger, who's our Nelson candidate, who is an entrepreneur down there, and so we think that representation is vital. I can also see, we do also need voices for small business outside Parliament. Politics is a mucky game, and we do need to be helping facilitate the small business community to find its own voices. The likes of Vaughan is a great example for people that can actually talk about the issues that are facing them. But the big problem with politics right now is that it's career politicians, right? I mean, most of the big parties really now have career politicians in most of the main roles, and they don't have a lot of experience outside, which is a major departure from how things were in the past.
If you have a look at the current coalition, or certainly one party in there, I can only see on the Labor Party 2 or 3 people who have actually had to worry about paying wages. The rest of them have been receiving their income courtesy of the government in some way, shape or form for most of their life, if not all of their life.
Yeah.
Okay, Vaughan asks another question. I think it's worthwhile actually going into it. Is it time to abandon the current situation of career advisors and advocates unknown to the small business community? He says it's not a smart way of shaping small business policy, but I do note the government under Rove is going down that particular route a little bit. What's your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I think you broke up while you're asking that question. Can you ask it again?
Okay, certainly. Is it time to abandon the current situation of career advisors and advocates unknown to the small business community?
Right. You mean the kind of people that currently represent small business around the table with government?
It looks like career advisors, probably. I'm not sure whether he means at school. Maybe we'll ask Vaughan to just clarify that, and I'll come back to that question. How would that suit you? Okay, Donald asks, can you explain how the equity tax applies to iwi-held assets?
Yeah, so iwi-held assets are, effectively, this is the same as all business assets. What we are proposing is, and like I said, the exact size of this depends on how much we can reduce other taxes by in response to so that we can equal the goal is to equalize the tax on housing with the tax on other assets. So the idea of taxing equity in property is to make sure that it's paying at least as much tax as a bank deposit, right? Now, for property that is already generating a return of at least a bank deposit rate, so that's now currently 2.5%, they wouldn't need to pay any extra tax on top of that. So that's, that system basically means that, most productive businesses, farms, that sort of things wouldn't need to pay any more tax than they currently do. Now, of course, on the iwi side of things, they have business arms and charitable arms. The business arms pay tax, and the charitable arms don't pay tax. So this change in the tax would not impact that at all.
One in from Jason Cargo. Hi, Geoff. Future planning of projects. Have we got to the stage of only shovel-ready projects? It's been great to have the Waikato Expressway to link productive areas together. So I guess what he's asking is the shovel-ready projects that the government has been touting at the moment, do you see those actually making a difference over the next 2 to 3 years? I guess I'll add to that in order to explain it a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big problem with focusing on shovel-ready projects is that we are not looking at really where the best return on investments could be. I understand the need to do things, to get things moving so that we can ensure that employment is there for people. But really, this is a symptom of the bigger issue that we haven't had a pipeline of infrastructure projects coming through for some time. And this is because we leave things entirely to politicians. So, you know, when National moved out and Labor moved in, Labor said, no, we're not going to do all the things that National was going to do. We want to do these things instead. So we spend 3 years working out how we're going to do those things that Labor wants to do, and nothing happens in the meantime. And then when Labor wants to do things, they go, oh, well, let's just grab the stuff that National already had. We need to, you know, we need to get the politicians out of the process. Don't get me wrong. I mean, politicians should be setting the strategy for this sort of stuff, but we should, you know, organisations like NZTA should be able to work on the business cases for these sorts of projects, particularly with local authorities, so that there is always a business case there and we know where the best return on investment is. You know, that's really how the system should work.
Okay, excellent. Jason, no, Justin Connolly. Great policies, Geoff. The Waikato is obviously very farming based. Can you talk through a comparative example of an owner-occupier house being taxed under your rules for 2 examples? One, I own a home and a business in the city, and I own a home that is a business, i.e. a farm.
Yeah, so provided, I mean, the farm is fairly straightforward. Like I said, provided the farm is returning the same amount of tax as a bank deposit is. So at the moment, like I said, if you've got money in the bank, it's earning about 2.5%, and you pay tax on that. Most farms are earning at least as much return as a bank deposit over time anyway. I know there's years where there's ups and downs, but over time, if you're earning more than a bank deposit, there's no real difference in the tax that you'd pay. For someone in an owner-occupied house, and which is you know, different to where their business is, the owner-occupied house would be expected to return as much tax as a bank deposit, so that would be, again, let's say it's, if you've got $1 million house, just for ease of numbers, that would be, a bank deposit would be returning about 25%, sorry, about 2.5% on that, say $25,000. And most people are paying about a third in tax, so that would be about $8,000 tax you'd expect to pay each and every year. Now, bear in mind, we'd be using that tax to reduce the tax on other investments. So if you then had a business in the city, your business in the city would be paying less tax commensurately. So it works out about even.
Okay. But overall, you'd be paying less tax compared to the current model?
Well, the idea is certainly for businesses to be paying less tax than the current model, yes. The idea, like I showed with that graph before, is that, you know, housing's down here and businesses are up here. We want to move that to being equal. So housing would, you know, property investments would be paying more tax and businesses would be paying less.
And that tax would be on your own home, the main dwelling.
It includes them. I mean, we're providing the, you know, we're suggesting a way to solve this issue. You know, we recognise that taxing the family home is a politically hot topic, and so you know, the major parties may wish to negotiate on that. I think our point is that if you exempt the family home from these sorts of taxes completely, I mean, some family homes are worth $200 million. So I'd be happy to talk about having a threshold so that most people's family homes were not included in that particular issue. And it is worth pointing out that that tax is only on the equity in the family home, not on debt. So debt already pays you know, its tax because, you know, through the banks. So it's only on the equity.
Okay. As Sean just asked, and it's a quick question. We'll look to this interview is being recorded, so I'll come back to that a little later on. Jason asks a final question. How would TOP prioritise future projects given the technology that's arriving on us at the moment? He says your views are good, but government have little power as businesses to, in the face of the likes of Amazon and Facebook, which are global disruptors.
Yeah, so I mean, the major point there is we need to make sure that those players are paying their fair share of tax. And, other countries like Australia and the UK have moved on making sure that Google and Facebook pay their fair share of tax. And we would certainly advocate doing the same here in New Zealand. Is he referring to infrastructure projects or?
Yeah, for example, you have the dichotomy between a virtual meeting like we're having now,
yeah,
and face-to-face, and there are arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
And so we've got an infrastructure project that gives us a 4-lane highway to Auckland versus a fibre highway that we're operating on today.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think that if we were to do, and this is why we're talking about doing business cases for these sorts of projects, right? So that we can actually compare them. I think if we were to do business cases, I think the potential, and we've already seen the value in the investment that National made in broadband, and I think we're only going to see greater value from that down the line with things like 5G and further rural broadband rollout. I mean, roads are definitely useful between cities. I think we are seeing the limitation of car-based transportation in our cities. Pretty much most of our major cities are nearing gridlock. So I think we need to think a little bit more carefully about how we, what sort of transport infrastructure we put in place in our cities. But the ideal, as I said before, is for people to live more centrally, and younger people want to do that. They want to live more centrally so that they have less time spent on travel. The fact that some people are living in Hamilton and commuting to Auckland just completely bewilders me, but that's the world that we live in.
I think the regional council thinks that there is a market for people to commute to Auckland, but only time will tell. Okay, we'll go back to Vaughan Winiata's question, because he's come back with a little bit of an explanation. So I'll read it word for word. You can see it yourself. So, it is time to abandon the current situation of career advisors and advocates unknown to the small business community. It's not a smart way to shape small business policy. When he says career advisors, he's talking of advocates, means government's use of people who are more bureaucratic and less genuine small business people. I got him wrong. This is currently a real problem. I think he says, I think you sound as though you're on the right track. So it's probably the likes of Te Waka and other business people, business organisations like that are the interface between business and government, and it's getting a more direct line through to government.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think government has taken the easy option in the past on this, in terms of just talking to whatever already exists out there, and that has led to that kind of model that Vaughan's talking about. We have to shake that up and actually be prepared to invest in building voices for small business that actually speak to small business and are rooted in that community.
Okay, Leo asked a quick question, and then I'll go on to some that's on the chat. So a superannuant will pay $8,000 to stay at home. So we'll be paid $8,000 per annum to stay at home. That was a question.
Oh, so I think they're referring to the equity tax. So yes, superannuitants would be subject to the equity tax. I mean, what we are suggesting, of course, is that they wouldn't need to pay that, because they are they're cash strapped. So they would have the option to defer payment until their estate can settle it, basically, because most countries in the world have estate or death duties, but New Zealand doesn't have that. And so what we're suggesting is that our equity tax could translate into an estate duty if people weren't able to pay it.
Okay, that's fine. I'll run through just one question from Mark Harden to all panelists. He writes, I've been laid off due to COVID-19 pandemic from a very well-paid job offshore. And searching for an avenue into land-based jobs, I'm appalled at the low level of wages, e.g. a forklift driver certified and experienced can expect $20 an hour. A highly skilled operator of a huge farm machinery can expect $20 an hour. How does top policy intend to address our very low wages?
Yeah, so we are actually, that's a great question, Mark. We are actually releasing our innovation policy tomorrow, which will, start to talk about these sorts of things. But I would say, in terms of the really big issue here, New Zealand is, compared to all other OECD countries, we put more of our money into housing and less of our money into businesses than just about any other developed nation. So as a result, our businesses are capital starved. That's what the economists call it, which means that the average worker doesn't have much in the way of machinery to work with. And the idea is that if we have greater investment in those sorts of things, then the amount of output that each worker can do can lift, and we can afford to pay people more. We're stuck in this crazy low wage equilibrium at the moment, this low wage situation where we put all of our money into housing, so therefore we have really low incomes, and so therefore we can't afford the housing that we're trying to live in. The really successful countries around the world invest in businesses that actually create exports and jobs, and that's what we need to be doing much more here. So at a big picture, I would say it's about where we invest as a nation, but we will be talking a lot more about innovation tomorrow as well.
I'll give you some feedback from down here. And talking to the business brokers, they are starved of businesses to sell. They have a surfeit of people with money cashed up, ready to buy businesses. There's not enough businesses for sale at the moment. So because at the moment you can invest in the share market, which is on a PE basis, fairly Wild West. You can invest in housing, which is going up in Auckland, as I see. But you put your money in the bank, and if you can get 2.5% on deposit, I think, Geoff, I'd take it if you could. I'm hearing under 2%. So people with spare cash, it's the baby boomers looking for investments, buying businesses, and at the moment it's hot.
That's good to hear.
Okay. Well, that pretty much covers it. I think Naomi Pocock says there's going to be a top roadshow at Hillcrest High on Monday the 27th. So those who are interested in seeing more of top, get yourself along there and have a bit of a look. I think it's also at 5 p.m. at Cambridge High School. So there's a few opportunities to actually catch up with Geoff, and
well, that'll be my deputy Shai, who she'll be running those particular roadshows, but she's fantastic.
Excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know where to go. Geoff, any final comments before we finish up?
Look, just thanks for the opportunity to talk. If people want to find out more, they can, by all means, go to top.org.nz. That's our website. We have a lot more detail there, and happy to talk more. If people want me to, come and talk to local groups or anything like that, you can contact me at leader@top.org.nz. Thanks very much.
Excellent, Geoff, and thank you very much for explaining the policies. We like to see policies. We get some evidence rather than just a bit of rhetoric. So from the Chamber, thank you very much to everyone else who came along. Thanks for coming along, and good afternoon.
Kia ora, Don. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks.